Martha and Henry, their faces etched with the wisdom of 68 years lived together, had come to embrace the profound stillness that settled over their lives in the quiet twilight of their senior years. Their cabin, a sturdy bastion of hand-hewn logs with a wide, welcoming porch that faced east, was tucked deep within the ancient, sprawling temperate rainforests of Washington state. Its windows, like the watchful eyes of an old sentinel, gazed out onto a perpetually misty valley where colossal, shaggy-barked cedars and towering Douglas firs, centuries old, touched the brooding, often clouded sky. For 40 years, since they'd first traded the clamor of Seattle for the deep quiet of the forest, this had been their sanctuary, a place where the pervasive symphony of the wind sighing through the pines and the distant, rhythmic roar of a cascading river were the dominant, comforting sounds, marking the passage of days and seasons. Henry, a master carpenter whose hands had crafted homes and intricate furniture for a lifetime, now found endless, meditative projects in maintaining their self-sufficient haven, each nail driven, each board planed, a small act of devotion. Martha, a former librarian with a mind as sharp and organized as her cherished card catalogs, now filled her days with painting watercolors of the forest's fleeting beauty, the ephemeral bloom of a trillium, the shifting light on moss-covered boulders, the subtle dance of morning fog. She also cultivated a vibrant, often unruly garden, a small, defiant burst of cultivated order against the encroaching wild, its produce filling their pantry with the bounty of their labor. Yet, a different kind of stillness, cold and insidious, had begun to creep into their lives over the past year, a quiet, often unspoken anxiety that settled between them like an unwelcome guest. Martha had been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, a subtle, relentless thief that slowly, imperceptibly at first, began to sap her boundless energy and, more cruelly, cloud her usually bright, inquisitive spirit. The vibrant hues of her watercolors seemed to dim, her meticulous garden sometimes lay untended for days. Henry, ever the steadfast rock, masked his own growing worry beneath a veneer of increased busyness, throwing himself into cabin repairs and firewood splitting with a ferocity that was almost alarming. But Martha, attuned to his every unspoken cue after decades of shared life, saw the subtle tension in his jaw, felt the subtle tremor in his hand when he held hers, sensed the deep lines around his eyes deepen with an unvoiced burden. Their shared world, once a haven of vibrant, unburdened joy, had subtly contracted, shadowed by the persistent uncertainty of her health and the relentless, undeniable weight of their own aging bodies. They found themselves talking less about the future, their conversations often circling back to Martha's fatigue, her latest doctor's appointment, the effectiveness of a new medication. They were caught in their private struggles, each navigating a silent, emotional landscape, the vast, comforting wilderness around them becoming almost a blurred backdrop rather than an active, healing participant in their emotional journey. The pervasive sense of peace that had defined their lives here seemed, at times, to recede, leaving a quiet, aching void. The forest, however, cared little for human anxieties. Its cycles continued, indifferent and ancient. One crisp October afternoon, as Martha rested on the wide porch swing, wrapped in a thick, woolen shawl despite the mild air, a book lying unopened in her lap, a small, dark shadow flitted across the periphery of her vision. She blinked, her weary eyes straining, thinking it was merely a trick of the dappled light filtering through the cedars, or perhaps a particularly large raven, its wings dark against the autumn sky. But then it reappeared, a distinct, furry form. It was a bear cub. Tiny, impossibly small, no larger than a sturdy bulldog, with clumsy, disproportionately large paws that seemed destined to trip it, and eyes that appeared too wide, too dark for its small, fuzzy head. It sniffed hesitantly at the very edge of their clearing, its wet nose twitching, taking in the alien sense of human habitation, a picture of bewildered vulnerability and heartbreaking loneliness. A bear cub, utterly alone. Her heart, which had felt so heavy and muted for months, gave a sudden, painful lurch, a surprising throb of raw concern. "Henry !" she called, her voice a little breathless, laced with an urgency she hadn't felt in months. Henry emerged from his detached workshop, a hammer still clutched in his strong hand, his brow furrowed with concern at the unexpected urgency in her tone. Martha simply pointed silently towards the edge of the woods. He saw it too, his expression shifting instantaneously from mild irritation at the interruption to immediate, professional assessment. His ranger instincts from a youth spent volunteering with wildlife services, long dormant, sprang to life. "Too small to be alone, Martha," he murmured, his voice low, almost to himself, his gaze already sweeping the dense tree line. "Where's its mother?" They watched for a long hour, a profound silence settling between them that had nothing to do with their usual quietude. They scanned the dense tree line, their eyes aching, listening for any sign of an adult bear's protective huff or a low, rumbling call. Nothing. The cub, after a few tentative, wobbly steps, paused, tilted its head, and then disappeared back into the thick undergrowth, leaving only a faint impression on their hearts, but a much deeper one on their minds. Over the next few days, the cub became a silent, sporadic visitor, a small, dark phantom haunting the edges of their property. It never dared to approach the cabin itself, maintaining a cautious, innate distance, but its presence was undeniable, a persistent, unsettling punctuation mark in their days. Martha saw it nosing around their sturdy, securely latched compost bin, its attempts to sniff out discarded apple cores comically inept. She watched it attempt to climb a small, smooth-barked pine tree, its clumsy paws slipping, its small body tumbling to the ground in a puff of needles, only to bravely try again. More often, it would simply sit in the middle of their clearing, a tiny, forlorn sentinel, staring at the cabin with an unnerving mixture of raw curiosity and what seemed to be profound loneliness, its small head cocked to one side as if trying to comprehend their strange, warm dwelling. Henry, always the pragmatist, initially tried to reason it away. "It's probably just strayed from its mother, Martha. She'll find it. Happens all the time." But the cub looked thinner each time they saw it, its fur less lustrous, its movements more tentative. The undeniable truth began to seep into their consciousness, chilling them: it was an orphan. Something had happened to its mother. A passing cougar, a hunting accident, a fall down a ravine. The wilderness, they knew, could be unforgiving. The cub's repeated, desperate appearances began to tug at something deep and long dormant within them, a primal instinct to protect, to nurture. It was a helpless creature, clearly struggling against insurmountable odds. Henry found himself unconsciously altering his paths when he gathered firewood or checked his traps, often passing by the areas where he'd last seen the cub, just to check on its welfare, his heart giving an involuntary squeeze each time he spotted its frail form. Martha started leaving out bowls of fresh, cool water, placed far from the cabin, well out of sight, reasoning that even a wild creature, especially one so young, desperately needed a drink in the crisp, dry autumn air. They never left food, knowing the absolute, irreversible dangers of habituation, of teaching a wild animal to rely on humans. But their concern grew exponentially with each passing day as the cub's gauntness became more apparent, its ribs subtly visible beneath its once plump fur. One particularly cold, gray morning, a thin layer of frost coating the cabin's porch, Martha found the cub curled up beneath the grand Douglas fir at the very edge of their yard, barely distinguishable from the gnarled roots and fallen needles. It was shivering violently, its small body racked with a hacking cough, a pathetic, wheezing sound that tore at her heart with sharp claws. Its fur was matted with dew and dirt, its small nose dry. She fought the overwhelming, almost unbearable urge to go to it, to comfort it, to scoop its small, trembling body into her arms and bring it inside to the warmth of their hearth. Henry found her later, perched on the edge of the porch, tears silently tracing paths down her weathered cheeks as she watched the cub's desperate shivers. "We have to do something, Henry," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion, barely audible over the wind. "It won't make it through winter. Not alone." Henry, practical and grounded, his own eyes clouded with a similar pain, knew she was right. They had to act. They carefully called the local wildlife rehabilitation center again, their voices conveying the deepening urgency. The biologist on the other end, Sarah, was kind but firm. Orphaned cubs were often taken in, but space was critically limited, and human intervention was always a last, absolute resort. They needed concrete proof of the cubs' distress, clear, undeniable signs of abandonment and medical need, not just occasional sightings. "Try to get a photo," Sarah advised, her voice professional but tinged with sympathy. "Detailed notes on its condition. And whatever you do, do not feed it. That's the worst thing you can do for a wild cub." The next few weeks became a quiet, anxious vigil that consumed their days and thoughts. Their own worries, though not entirely forgotten, receded subtly into the background, replaced by a consuming, shared focus on the little cub. Martha, despite her persistent fatigue, found a surprising, almost exhilarating surge of renewed energy. She sat on the porch for hours, bundled in thick blankets, binoculars clutched in her hands, watching the cub's every movement, every faltering step. Henry, meticulously, painstakingly, set up a discreet trail camera he'd used for tracking deer, hoping to capture irrefutable visual evidence of the cub's solitary existence, its struggles. They observed its clumsy, desperate attempts at foraging, awkward digs for roots, tentative swatting at insects, its constant, futile search for food. They saw it chase after squirrels, mimicking hunting instincts, but failing miserably to catch anything more than air. It was learning, trying to learn, but agonizingly slowly, desperately. They noted its cough worsened, becoming more frequent and ragged, its movements more sluggish, its eyes duller. The threat of winter grew heavier with each passing day. One bitterly cold, sleeting afternoon, the cub appeared with a deep, ugly gash on its hind leg, likely from a run-in with a sharp branch, a territorial skirmish with a larger bobcat, or perhaps a desperate fall. It limped painfully, dragging its paw, leaving a faint trail of blood in the melting snow. Henry, seeing the severity of the wound through his binoculars, the wound already looking inflamed and angry, knew it was now beyond just food or water. Infection would set in quickly, threatening its very life. This was the moment. They called the rehab center again, their voices conveying the raw desperation they felt. Sarah, hearing the urgency, the tremor in Henry's voice, listened intently, then agreed to come out the very next morning, provided they could guide her directly to the cub's current hiding spot. The next morning dawned with a deceptive, icy stillness. Armed with the trail camera footage of the cub's solitary struggles and the explicit details of its worsening injury, Henry, his face grim with determination, led the biologist, Sarah, through the dense, snow-dusted undergrowth. Martha, too frail for the arduous trek, waited anxiously at the cabin, her heart a tangled knot of hope and fear, 1,000 silent prayers on her lips. They found the cub huddled in a small, shallow hollow beneath a fallen cedar, shivering violently, its body racked with fever, its wound a weeping, festering mess. Sarah, calm, professional, and efficient, approached with practiced movements. She tranquilized the cub, gently examined it, and confirmed their worst fears. It was severely malnourished, dangerously dehydrated, and the leg wound was deeply infected, bordering on septic. "You did the absolute right thing," she told Henry, her voice soft but firm, her eyes meeting his with genuine appreciation. "Without your vigilant observations and this precise timing, it wouldn't have made it another 24 hours. As Sarah carefully loaded the limp cub into a specialized carrier, a profound, almost dizzying sense of relief washed over Henry, quickly followed by an unexpected wave of sorrow, a deep, aching emptiness. He hadn't realized, until this very moment, how deeply this small, wild creature had burrowed into his heart, how its silent presence had become a focal point for their days. He walked back to the cabin, the silence of the forest now feeling strangely hollow and empty without the unspoken presence of the cub. Martha met him at the door, her face pale with worry, her hands clasped tightly. He simply shook his head, unable to speak, and she understood. Tears welled in her eyes, not just for the cub and its uncertain future, but for the raw, aching beauty of their unexpected connection, the bittersweet hope that it would survive, and the knowledge that they had acted, truly acted, beyond themselves. The cabin felt strangely quiet in the days and weeks that followed. A new emptiness hung in the air. Their old worries about Martha's illness and their future, though not forgotten, began to creep back in, but subtly changed, softened by the memory of the cub. They had faced something external, something immediate and heartbreaking, and they had acted with purpose. It had given them a new focus, a shared purpose that transcended their own quiet struggles. They found themselves talking about the cub constantly, speculating on its recovery, wondering if it would truly be released back into their forest. The act of caring for a creature outside themselves, however subtly, had loosened the tight, anxious knot of their private anxieties. Martha, despite her fatigue, found her artistic impulse rekindled. She started painting again, but now her watercolors featured a small, clumsy bear cub exploring a sun-dappled clearing, its eyes full of life, or a tiny paw print in fresh snow. Henry, rather than simply maintaining the cabin, began building a new, sturdier compost bin with an expanded capacity, a deeper understanding of the wild's interconnected needs influencing his craft. He also began mapping out new, more discreet trails leading away from the cabin, considering future wildlife corridors. Weeks turned into months. They received regular, hopeful updates from Sarah, the cub, whom Sarah had formally named Moss, for the mossy green hue of its innocent eyes was recovering with astonishing speed, gaining weight rapidly, its wound healing cleanly, leaving only a faint scar. It was playful, curious, and developing well, its wild instincts sharpening daily under careful supervision. The plan was solid, to release it back into the wild in late spring, once it was fully recovered and demonstrably capable of fending for itself, having learned crucial survival skills from surrogate mothers at the rehab center. They had debated visiting, the longing almost unbearable, but Sarah advised firmly against it. "It needs to remain wild," she explained gently but emphatically. "Human contact makes releases infinitely harder, sometimes impossible. It needs to fear us, for its own safety." They understood, though the thought of seeing Moss again, even briefly, was a powerful, aching longing that sometimes kept Martha awake at night. Spring finally returned, not with a gentle unfurling, but with a vibrant, triumphant roar of melting snow and rushing rivers that carved new, glistening channels through the thawing landscape. The forest slowly stretched awake, vibrant with new life, the first tenacious green shoots pushing through the melting snow, the triumphant return of migratory birds filling the air with song and restless energy, the sharp, clean scent of damp earth and new growth filling their lungs with renewed vigor. Then, a call from Sarah, her voice bright with good news. "Moss is ready. We'll be releasing him tomorrow, near the upper ridge, far from your cabin, but still within his mother's old, recognized territory." She thanked them again, profusely, for their crucial help, emphasizing how their detailed observations had made all the difference. Martha and Henry spent the entire evening in quiet, almost sacred anticipation, a complex mix of profound joy and a strange, aching emptiness, like parents sending a child off to college. The next morning, too early for their usual gentle routine, they hiked to a high vantage point overlooking the vast forest valley, a place where they could see without being seen, miles from the actual release site. Henry, despite his own fatigue, held Martha steady as her energy flagged on the steep ascent, guiding her with a gentle hand. They waited, their eyes scanning the distant treeline, a small, hopeful ache in their chests. They saw the truck arrive, a tiny speck in the vast green distance. They saw two figures emerge. And then, a small, dark shape, hesitant at first, then bounding with undeniable vigor. "Moss." He paused, sniffed the air, took a few tentative steps, then, with a sudden burst of youthful energy, he bounded into the deeper forest, disappearing from view in a matter of seconds, swallowed by the ancient trees. Martha leaned into Henry, silent tears streaming down her face, tears of profound relief, of overwhelming joy, of a bittersweet letting go. Henry held her, his own eyes wet, a deep, abiding peace settling over him, knowing they had given this small life a chance. In the years that followed, Martha's condition miraculously stabilized, her energy slowly returning, though she never fully recovered her previous boundless vitality. But their lives had been irrevocably changed. The silent, vulnerable presence of the bear cub had reminded them, in the most visceral way, of the enduring strength of life, even in its most fragile forms. It had pulled them out of their quiet despair, giving them a shared purpose, a renewed focus that transcended their own personal difficulties. They continued their daily routines, but now with an added layer of observation, of listening, of understanding the intricate dance of the wilderness around them. They occasionally found signs of bears, a fresh track by the river, a distinct claw mark on a favorite berry tree, and always wondered if one belonged to Moss, grown strong and wild, a true king of the forest. Their cabin, once a sanctuary from the complexities of the human world, now felt like a living, breathing part of the wild world itself, connected to the vast, living tapestry of the forest in a way they hadn't fully appreciated before. The knowledge that they had played a small, vital role in preserving a wild life filled them with a quiet, enduring joy that no illness or age could diminish. Their hands, once only tending to their own needs and their small garden, had reached out, however subtly, to the wild, and in doing so, had found a profound healing within themselves. The lone bear cub, appearing at their cabin's edge, had not only found its life saved but had, in turn, breathed new life into theirs, filling their remaining years with a richness and purpose they had never anticipated, a silent, wild testament to the power of compassion and the enduring spirit of the natural world. They became, in their quiet way, guardians of the valley, their lives inextricably woven into the fabric of the ancient forest.